us didn't know what to expect when traveling to India, but we knew we were in for an adventure. And an adventure it was. The unfamiliar environment was filled with surprises around every corner. From the abundance of people, diverse and flavorful cuisines, to an inherent prominence of religion and a history spanning back to the beginning of human civilization, the way of life simply contrasts with the norms that many of us grew up with in the U.S. The experience was unique and had struck each of us for its distinct reasons, but we all went into it with curious and open minds, ready to fill our cup up with memorable experiences.
We were prepared to see remnants of the British colony since we were briefed beforehand during our pre-departure sessions. The impact of colonialism can be seen directly from the architecture, most notably in Kochi, where the Portuguese, Dutch, and later the English colonies invaded. It was in Kochi where we visited a Jewish synagogue in a little tourist neighborhood called Jewtown. Paradesi Synagogue is known as the oldest active synagogue in India. We were informed that people of the Jewish faith visit Kochi for this synagogue every year. To our surprise, we were standing on hand-painted floor tiles that were Chinese. The fishing docks we visited in the morning also were touched by Chinese influence brought in by traders. The fishermen demonstrated their use of Chinese fishing nets, accompanied by song. Jewish influence extended to the hotel we were staying in, built in a Portuguese colonial style and had once belonged to a Jewish family. The destabilization from the partition continues to affect the current political climate. Though we have seen Hindus and Muslims coexist in India in everyday life on bustling streets, Islamophobia is still common and supported by the BJP, the right-wing Hindu nationalist party that the current Prime Minister Narendra Modi represents. Having known that conflict in Kashmir was happening before coming to India, we were curious to see how the Indian media would cover the story on the TV screens at breakfast. We had a long discussion about Kashmir at a hotel in Mekliganj, a region home to many Tibetan refugees who fled from the Chinese occupation of the current-day Tibet Autonomous Region. Parallel to this tension between the Muslim-majority Pakistan and Hindu-majority India over Kashmir. From the monuments commissioned by the Mughals that we visited in Delhi and Agra to the Jewish synagogue in Kochi, many groups have left their mark in India. Like back home in the US, India is a land of many religions. Though ideally united by our differences, the livelihoods of minorities are under threat. Learning about the deep history of many cultures that are either indigenous to India or were brought in by different rulers, traders, and colonialists was a drastic contrast to the relatively young history of the U.S. as a nation post-colonialism that we were taught in school.
Organizational site visits and learning about India's economy was another huge component to our growth. For our expectations, we imagined problems these companies faced were related to serving the individual customer, how to reach markets, how to meet demand, how to cut costs, and any other problem a company in the US might similarly face. Many of the sites we visited were very inspirational, For example, Purkama, Mesh, Consumers India, Help Age India, and more. We talked to amazing people who, after years in successful careers, donated most of their time to these organizations in order to give people in India valuable resources they wouldn't otherwise have. For example, at Purkama, their main goal was to educate slum kids. Purkama focuses on not just the kids' academic performance and supplying academic opportunities, but Purkama values primarily the love and happiness recipients feel and receive from staff, fellow students, and the work that they learn from, which can enrich their educational experience. It was an inspirational visit, and we were pleasantly surprised to find principles used there that aren't commonly used or accepted in teaching in the US. We discovered Purkama's principles are extremely effective. About 60% of the population live in poverty, where people's small salary only provide enough for food, if they're lucky. Thus, if a company like Purkama decided to charge tuition to kids in the slums, it would actually deter students away from the school and decrease application rates. That's because not only do they not have present financial capability, but many would be financially insecure for future financial capability. That's because in many underdeveloped countries, getting out of debt or paying off a loan as someone in a lower socioeconomic status is much harder, if not impossible, to do.
As we were preparing to go to India, we had high expectations for exposure to diversity of culture and food. As a cohort, we all had eaten some kind of Indian food in the States, but we were never able to experience something authentic, let alone be exposed to food outside of North India. We were all excited to try new foods that we could only see on TV or heard about. As far as the culture in India, we knew a bit from the books that we read and the lectures that we heard, but nothing can compare to the experiencing the culture firsthand. So we were excited to meet the different companies that were hosting us, as well as being able to go sightseeing. One of the experiences that taught us about culture was when we visited Norpalinka Institute. We saw how Norpalinka preserved a culture that represented a minority within India's population. Tibetan refugees and their descendants keep their religious art in practice through apprenticeships taught by masters of their respected crafts. Named after a summer place in Tibet, Norpalinka aims to keep Tibetan art alive in their homes away from home. Without this trip to Mecklenburg, we could have easily forgotten this minority within India. One of the experiences that taught us about food was when we were able to visit Akshaya Patra. After the first couple of days of arriving in India, we were able to visit Akshaya Patra, a place that cooks over 7 tons of rice each day for schools within Bangalore. Excited to see how this whole process takes place, we were even more mind blown to even get to taste some of their food. Akshaya Patra does not cook any meat and is completely vegetarian. So we were able to taste their food, and it was an amazing experience. This was the first of many vegetarian meals we would get to experience during our time in India. This experience, as well as the next 3 weeks in India eating primarily vegetarian food, proved many of our stereotypes wrong about how meat is a must-have to sustain a healthy diet. Comparing this huge difference to America, we see that it is possible to decrease the amount of meat we eat because it is such a big contributor to carbon emissions as well as the global warming problem due to our agricultural practices back in the States. A huge part of the Indian culture is their caste system. During our time in India, we held a discussion to acknowledge it and to understand it in depth. We learned that the caste system is deeply rooted within the society because it is fused into Hinduism. For a millennia, it had existed as varnas and jatis, categories and subcategories, where individuals and families were categorized as a form to delegate tasks required by society. Then the British introduced a term called caste, and the caste system, as we know it today, was born. Learning about the caste system was different than learning about any other forms of oppression within history. The oppression that we learned back in the States is dominantly about racism between different races. But learning about the caste system taught us about a new form of oppression that was very prominent within India. It's different than what we have learned and have been exposed to because this type of oppression It's more or less based off of internal aspects rather than skin color. It's based on family, genes, and history. It's not color-coded, but rather something the whole Indian society accepts and has for a millennia. Even higher castes admire the caste system and what people in those higher castes have done. Gandhi opposed taking away the caste system while he was in the higher caste, whereas B.R. Ambedkar, who was in the lower caste, saw the discrimination it inflicted. To understand someone's culture and diverse perspective, it is one thing to read about it, but it is another thing to experience it in person. After our experiences in India, we found a new appreciation for the different types of culture India has and the struggles that Indians have had to face from whichever caste they come from. By learning about the Indian culture and how it was formed, it helped us understand why certain things work the way they do today. We were able to visually see the effects of the caste system, and while it is hard to put into words what we exactly saw, we all reflected and said that it was more of a feel versus what we can describe. And while no one would explicitly say that the caste system is there, you can definitely feel its presence because it is so ingrained into the Indian lifestyle. We also saw major differences between North India and South India. Delhi had a much stronger Islam influence, whereas South India, for example in Kochi, had a lot more temples. So as we were moving from city to city, we were able to see these different changes and the different cultures that each city had. We also saw different levels of poverty throughout the country as we visited different places, and how people have tried to make India a better place through the impacts such as parikrama, helping kids living in the slums to receive a high quality education. Lastly, revolving around the caste system, the government has made it easier for people that come from lower castes to have the ability to become doctors, as it holds 50% of the government jobs for people of the lower caste. The initiative to help the lower caste can see similar parallels to the affirmative action in America, where there are rules put forth by different organizations to help marginalized communities get a fair opportunity.
Throughout our adventures, we shared a ton of bus rides, a few really good laughs, and an unparalleled amount of masala chais. By keeping our curiosity alive as students and not as tourists, we were able to experience India through a lens that amplified the beauty of the culture and the people. What we learned about economics, history, religion, and politics was experienced firsthand, which is why we will take these memories with us and cherish them for a lifetime.